Good morning, everybody. On behalf of TU Dublin Hothouse, LINC and Synergy, I welcome you today to our celebration of World Intellectual Property Day, 26th of April. My name is Paul Maguire, and I'm the Head of Innovation and Enterprise for TU Dublin, and I run TU Dublin's Knowledge Transfer Office, Hothouse. We have a packed session today highlighting how a strong IP strategy can boost competitiveness and resilience for SMEs, which in turn can help boost TU Dublin and Ireland's reputation as a global innovation leader. Speakers will take a close look at the processes involved in identifying, protecting and leveraging IP assets for business growth, how licensing intellectual property developed here in TU Dublin can provide a real competitive advantage for your business, and present one investment source that can accelerate commercialization of groundbreaking research. Today is World Intellectual Property Day. When people think of IP, one of the first things that comes to mind are patents. After doing some initial Googling, I found out that the first patent that was filed and granted was assigned to Samuel Hopkins on the 31st of July, 1790, over 230 years ago, and concerned the making of potash and pear ashes. Since then, nearly 10 million patents have been filed worldwide. TU Dublin's first patent was filed back in 1995 with Mick Devereux listed as one of the inventors, and it related to the preparation and use of catalysts. TU Dublin's most cited patent application is the Crest Sol Gel patent by current TU Dublin researchers Brendan Duffy and Mohammed Wiba, and was cited over 60 times by other universities and multinationals, including Boeing, Samsung and Hewlett Packard. As shown in our video at the start of this event, TU Dublin has filed 124 patents, of which 18 have been granted to date, forming an important element of licensed IP to industry collaborators and providing a bedrock for the formation of TU Dublin spin-outs such as Sonic Ladder, Castus and Micron Agritech, with Tara from Micron speaking later on at this event. But intellectual property is not just about patents. A topical story at the moment playing out in the media is about a caterpillar chocolate sponge cake that most of you are probably familiar with from children's birthday parties. Marks & Spencer's announced that they were pursuing a legal challenge to protect their Colin the Caterpillar trademark against Aldi's Cuthbert the Caterpillar. Trademarks in this case cover the name of Colin the Caterpillar and the packaging used, with Marks & Spencer's arguing the similarities mean customers think that they are the same standard. What is also important to remember that since launching Colin the Caterpillar in 1990, Marks & Spencer's have sold over 15 million cakes, or enough Colin the Caterpillars to stretch over 2,250 kilometres placed end to end. Aldi are apparently still selling Cuthbert in their stores, saying that they're taking a stand against caterpillar cruelty. Let's all hope that Colin and Cuthbert can be friends in the near future. But back to today and our running order. We have Dr. Andrew Marsh launching our new TU Dublin online invention disclosure form at 11:25. Followed by our first guest speaker, Dr. Alison Campbell, OBE, Director of Knowledge Transfer Ireland at 11:30, speaking on the topic of why is IP important to industry and academia with insights on Irish KTI activities. Following Alison, we will introduce two short case studies from Tara Mcgelligas, co-founder and creative director of TU Dublin spin-out company Micron Agritech, and from James O'Daly, founder and managing director of IMCEL, who partnered with TU Dublin on several collaborative research projects over the years. At 12 o'clock, we are delighted to welcome our second guest speaker, Chris Horn, investor, mentor, partner in Atlantic Bridge and regular columnist in the Irish Times, who will talk about the Atlantic Bridge University Seed Fund. This will be followed by our panel session, hosted by our own Claire McNamee, with closing remarks from Jack Macdonald. If at any stage you have any questions, please join the conversation online using our hashtag TU Dublin Innovation. So that's all from me for now. I look forward to seeing you later on during the panel session. I hope you enjoy the talks and the panel session and the foresights that they gave today. Now I'd like to hand over to TU Dublin President, Professor David FitzPatrick.
Paul, thank you very much. And good morning, everybody, and welcome to TU Dublin's celebration of World Intellectual Property Day. Paul mentioned the first patent that came up, but probably actually more importantly from an Irish context is that Ireland set the ground rules in terms of copyright, and St. Columba in the 6th century learned the lesson that, according to the High King, to every cow its calf. So every copy belongs to the original owner. So Ireland has a strong history in IP law and management, and TU Dublin is very proud of its role within Ireland more recently in terms of supporting and enabling young entrepreneurs, companies, and so on to develop, particularly through our network of knowledge transfer offices. World Intellectual Property Day is celebrated around the globe with the aim of generally increasing everyone's understanding of intellectual property. But in particular, it shines a light on the critical role of the small and medium-sized enterprises within the economy and how they can use IP to build stronger and more competitive and resilient businesses. This focus is of particular relevance to TU Dublin as we have a fundamental and core commitment to creating, supporting and commercialising the intellectual assets of the university. And this is supported very ably through our knowledge transfer offices that are located on each of the TU Dublin campuses in the city centre, Blanchardstown and Tallaght. As Paul has mentioned, as you will have noticed from the opening video, the scale and significance of the success that TU Dublin has had is quite striking. Building on our track record to date, we will continue to encourage our students, our academics and our researchers to engage with the knowledge transfer offices in order to find out as much as they can about how they can become part of our future story of success. Nationally, in Ireland, we have a knowledge transfer ecosystem that's supported by Knowledge Transfer Ireland. And this is the national office that helps businesses to benefit from access to Irish expertise and technology by making it very simple to connect and engage with the research base in Ireland. And on behalf of TU Dublin, I'd very much like to acknowledge the support of Knowledge Transfer Ireland in our endeavours as a university and look forward to many more years of successful partnership. And I'm particularly pleased to be able to welcome Dr. Alison Campbell as one of our guest speakers here today. TU Dublin's strategic plan is built on the UN Sustainable Development Goals and has 3 pillars: people, planet and partnership. Within TU Dublin, there's a core commitment to sharing our knowledge and expertise and partnering with other HEIs, organisations, industry and citizens. These commitments are embedded within our strategic plan and will be realised through our soon-to-be published Open Research Policy and Open Innovation Charter. These policies will support increased inflow and outflow of knowledge to and from TU Dublin in order to accelerate the internal innovation and enabling TU Dublin to contribute further on a national and global level. Within today's event, we have exemplars from campus spinouts, Micron Agritech, for example, to companies who license our technologies such as ImCell Limited, as well as the launch of our TU Dublin Digital Innovation Declaration Form. Our guest speaker, Mr. Chris Horn from Atlantic Bridge, will speak of the University Bridge Fund, and as founder and CEO was chairman of the technology middleware business Iona Technologies. That company began life as a campus company in Trinity College and went on to have the 5th largest IPO in NASDAQ history. So a lot of inspiration for us all to take from today. Thank you very much for joining us, and I look forward to learning a lot in the course of the next hour or so. I'll now hand you over to Dr. Andrew Marsh from TU Dublin for the launch of the Digital Invention Declaration Form.
Thanks very much. As mentioned, my name is Dr. Andrew Marsh. I'm the Senior Licensing Executive in TU Dublin Hothouse. We provide, with our colleagues in LINC and Synergy, knowledge transfer support across the university. I'm very, very pleased today to launch and also to demo our new online invention disclosure form. And in fact, it's an online inventor portal as well. For those of you who aren't that familiar with what an invention disclosure form is, it's essentially the starting point for a conversation between the Knowledge Transfer Office and inventors. The inventors It gives an opportunity for our staff members and students to tell us about the innovations that are coming out of their research labs and their research groups, and that they think may have some applications in the real world. Over the years, we've tried to make this process of submitting invention disclosures as simple as possible because we really want to encourage staff members to start that conversation with us. So we've stripped out a huge amount of information that we used to ask. Now we really just ask you to tell us about your invention, why you think it's interesting, and then we will follow up with the inventors for a conversation about how best to support and commercialize that invention. And with that, I'm just going to jump in here and do something I swore I'd never do, which is a live demo of a website. So I'm going to share my screen here. So as you can see, we have a custom URL. This is all cloud hosted. You can easily fill out an account, create an account, and log into the inventor portal. I've created a test account here just because my own account is an admin account. And the idea behind this is that it's a place for our inventors to not only submit invention disclosure forms, but they can track all their invention disclosures, and they can be notified if they're added as an inventor in invention disclosure. They can go in, they can do edits. It reduces the friction for our inventors, so they don't have to chase people around labs to try and get signatures and documents. There isn't Word documents going over and back between different members of research groups. So when an inventor comes in, one of our staff members can come in and they can see all their current disclosures. In this case, we don't have any, and they can add a disclosure quite easily. I'm just going to bring you in here and just highlight a few aspects of the information that we look for from inventors to help us best support their commercialization. So the main part is we ask for a brief description of the invention. This is, why the invention is exciting, why it's interesting, what it does, the sort of information you might describe to a colleague if you're telling them about something great that had just come out of your lab. And then we ask for a minimal amount of other information up front. What's very important for us to know is if there has been a disclosure or if there's a planned disclosure. So for example, in this case, I may have just realized at the last minute that this may have applications, and I'm about to give a disclosure at the end of the week. This is crucial information for us to know because disclosures can affect IP rights and commercialization strategies. So we need to know this. And then the other information we ask our inventors to consider is around sustainability. So we have set as an objective within the university that we want to create knowledge and technologies that can address the sustainable development goals. And we ask all of our inventors to sort of consider a little bit of their invention and could it address any of these sustainable development goals? And if they think it could, just tick the box. And then if they have other information about how it might address the sustainable development goals, they can go through here and give us that information, or that can be teased out in a conversation with a staff member such as myself or one of my colleagues. We really do hope that the inventors will engage with this part and really have a good think about how their inventions could address the sustainable development goals. You can add remarks, upload documents, and list who the inventors are. At the end of it, you submit for review, and it enters into our workflow. It'll be automatically sent to staff members in TU Dublin. I've forgotten to add something. You submit for review, and then you can see your disclosures on this page here. So again, the advantage for the inventors here is it's all online. The sign-off process among the inventors is all done online. And you can track all your invention disclosures in one particular place. All your co-inventors will automatically be notified. So we hope that our staff members will engage with this as a way to reduce the friction, make it easier for them to come and tell us about the great work that they've been doing, which is what we're interested in. So I'm going to stop my sharing there. And I'm just going to introduce you now to our next speaker, who is, again, as was mentioned, is Dr. Alison Campbell, OBE, who's the Director of Knowledge Transfer Ireland, and is going to talk to us today about why IP is important to industry and academia and give us some insights on Irish knowledge transfer activities.
Andrew, thank you. Thank you for that introduction. Well, it's great to be here today and great to be able to celebrate World IP Day. Often we'll see things, and we'll be seeing many of them, I'm sure, today in social media, but it's lovely to actually be part of an event and to be connected with so many of you. So when we think about IP, and we've already used the word knowledge transfer, what on earth are we talking about? Well, knowledge transfer is about how we commercialize research. It's about collaboration, advice, creating spin-out companies, licensing. It's about revenue. It's about know-how. We certainly heard about some of these things when we were thinking about Colin the Caterpillar earlier. And of course, it's about intellectual property itself that underpins it. But I think perhaps more simply, it's easiest to say this is all about dissemination of the outputs of research. And this is just an increasingly important element of the wider impact agenda, which is very resonant, I think, for universities throughout the country and internationally these days. And of course, these sorts of activities do yield some really exciting results. And, you know, across the country, we really do have a myriad of data and stories that explain the value of intellectual property, of commercialization, and of research itself. And I wanted to just give you a few statistics this morning. So we like to, in Knowledge Transfer Ireland, one of the things we do as a national office is take an oversight of what's going on within the system. And so every year we like to take a snapshot of activities that have happened in the previous year. And the latest data that we published last summer was for 2019. And obviously there'll be 2020 data coming out soon this year. But what was really interesting was that if you look at the end of the year in 2019, there were over 2,000 research collaborations that were going on between researchers and companies. And that's a snapshot on one day only. So that means that during the year, if we think about the number of collaborations that will have come to a close, if we think about a number of new research collaboration agreements that might just have been signed, we're talking a heck of a lot more than 2,000. Andrew was talking there about new inventions, and they're really important. Disclosing a new invention really is the very beginning of the whole process of seeing if there's anything that can be captured that could be of value to users. And users are actually greater than commercial companies. It can be public sector, it can be NGOs, it can be charities. But inventions really are, I guess, that start. It's a sense of the activity and the engagement with the Innovation Office. And it's the potential for new inventions that can be commercialised. And back in 2019, again, our data told us that there were over 450 new inventions disclosed. That's actually quite a lot when you consider we've only got about 20 higher education institutions in the country. And, you know, if we look at the other end, if we look at some of the outputs, there were 30 new spin-out companies created in just 1 year. And that's actually not bad. When you put that into a context, the research expenditure across the whole system in Ireland, it's less than that of the University of Oxford. So that really isn't bad going, I think, for the country. But of course, that's just numbers. And what sits below the numbers is a real meaning. And where does that get us? Now, I was just talking about research collaborations there. If you think about all of the research and development agreements that were signed in Ireland, again in 2019, 3/4 of them were with SMEs. That means that small and medium-sized companies, and mainly small actually in Ireland, are working with our universities and our institutes. Research is really helping them to be more innovative. And that means that they're being more competitive. And that, in turn, of course, means that we have got a far more vibrant economy. We've got lots more interesting jobs in R&D for students and for young researchers. And we've got high quality, high skilled jobs, which is just what we want as a knowledge economy. And when you think about some of those spin out companies that I was talking to you about, 30 of them coming out every year, not all of them will flourish, and we can't expect them to. And actually, if every single one of them did, we'd probably be doing something wrong and not taking enough risk. But many do flourish, and many do go on to stand in their own right or to be acquired by other companies. And, that's not all bad news for the country, because in the process of doing that, those companies get a very needed boost in terms of cash injections, in terms of access to new markets, to new resources that they may not have if they stand alone. One of the things I think that is great, if we look at this in an Irish context, is that in the majority of situations where those acquisitions happen, we're keeping a good footprint here in Ireland. And it's often the research and the research teams that stay anchored in the country. And that has to say a lot about the quality of the research that we're producing and the kind of welcoming environments we have here. And of course, so many of those will stay close to the university that they came from and close to the research groups that they came from. And again, that I think is just a testament to the value of the knowledge and the relationships and the skills that we have in the country, all of which forms know-how. And know-how is a really important part of intellectual property. Now, in the past year, we've really seen the value of research and of knowledge transfer. And there's so many examples that you will all know about that I don't need to tell you about. Some of the things that I found interesting as we've talked to the different colleges have been some of the industry collaborations that have come out in the pandemic. We found novel ways for carers to connect with patients in ICU and to work with the medical staff in ways in which it just wouldn't have been possible pre-pandemic. We've had some collaborations where we've actually seen work for people to develop new technologies to help people who've got learning difficulties to really understand the new environment that they needed to adapt to in really very short order. And I picked both of those examples because I think they resonate so well with what we heard right at the beginning, which was around open innovation and open access. And one of the things that the innovation offices looked very closely at and worked with researchers to help towards was, how do we best interact with business? How open do we need to be? How flexible do we need to be about intellectual property? And the other thing that we've seen during the pandemic is companies look very differently at relationships with the colleges and look very differently at intellectual property. And I think for all of it, people have asked the question, what do we really, really need? What do we really need to have in place? And where can we afford to be more relaxed? And that's been very helpful in terms of helping things happen in a really agile manner. Now, will that continue in the future? We don't know, we can only hope, but as the old adage goes, it takes two to tango, and it actually requires that kind of thought on both sides of the party when relationships and transactions are happening. And of course, I have to pick an example closer to home, don't I? So again, a really nice story, and during the pandemic was the TU Dublin spin-out casters with its antimicrobial, antiviral coating technology. Hugely heavy demand from customers, everybody running to keep up. Great position to be in. Now, as you've probably gathered, and as I've tried to point to, at the heart of those examples, there's so many more that we have to hand, is intellectual property. And as Paul was saying at the beginning, it comes in a variety of forms. We often think of intellectual property as patents. It's something that looks more tangible, and lots of people can think about filing a patent application and getting it granted. But also, intellectual property is about copyright, trademarks, design rights, all of which Colin, the caterpillar, has in spades. And of course, know-how, which I've talked about. And actually, really good intellectual property and intellectual property management involves bringing several of those aspects together in the right kind of way to make for some really attractive commercial propositions. So why is IP important? I've said commercialization, people can use it. What does it mean in reality? It's an asset. Ultimately, it's an asset that can stimulate commercialization, can help value grow, and can build confidence. It provides a company with some very clear water in which to operate. And that's really important. It gives them the potential to ward off other people who might want to encroach into that space. That's the caterpillars coming in. But if you think about it, if companies have to invest a lot of money in research, development, in sales, in marketing, if we need investors to come in and put their cash on the table, you need to have some certainty that the area in which you work is going to be clear for you, or at least defensible, and that you can provide some kind of a barrier to entry to competitors. And also you can find a way to hit them with a very large stick if you need to. And of course, intellectual property is an asset that can be traded. So it does provide value to a company and to investors. And it also provides value to the university, although it is always very important to remember that in a university setting, intellectual property is really going to be very early stage, and the path to a product is going to need a lot of investment and a lot of... Well, why is IP important? And the joy of Zoom. This is where if we were all live together, it'd probably be, instead of losing Zoom, I'd be tripping over a microphone or something, and at least you could all have a laugh. But here we are. IP is important. It's a commercial asset, and it gives people confidence and clear water in which to operate. And that's really important for companies that are wanting to invest in technology to move it forward. It's important for investors too. And it's great to be able to know how much freedom you've got and the ability that you might have to ward off any kind of competitors. It's a really useful asset to trade if you're a company. It's also useful if you're a university to have this kind of an asset, because it's of value to you to trade. But I think a word of caution here, it's always helpful to remember that university IP is invariably going to be early stage, and it needs to be thought of, treated, traded, and valued in that kind of way. Companies are going to have to put in a lot of effort and a lot of time and a lot of money to take that piece of IP, to do the R&D around it, to take it to market, to file additional IP around it. So a bit of realization and reality is very good within that process. One of the things that I think is quite interesting and of value to research is when we're thinking about IP, and particularly patents, it's always worth saying that there's a really good bit of intelligence gathering out there. Because anybody who's filed a patent needs to file it, and it becomes published. And in order to get a patent, you have to be able to explain really clearly what the invention is and how to make it work. And that is brilliant in terms of information about new technology out there for research and information about what your competitors are doing. So always of high value to go and have a look in the various patent databases that are cheap and free to access, such as the European patent database, Espasnet, just to see what's out there, to do a bit of dipping in and out, always very stimulating as well when you're thinking about research. Of course, the other thing at a university level that IP is becoming increasingly important for is when you're looking at funding, whether it's accessing different kinds of funding that are available for, say, proof of concept that you couldn't have if you didn't have a piece of IP, or whether it's mainstream research funding, where increasingly the funders are either looking for evidence that you're thinking about commercialization, so you might have a track record, or thinking about the potential to commercialize and bring things out for societal and economic good. So thinking about IP as an element of research is really important. And of course, the most important aspect of all of this, and something I touched on earlier, is IP and its commercialization is about the fundamental of research. It's another route for dissemination of the outputs of research. And who's going to argue with something like that that's at the heart of academia? Now, as I hope I've demonstrated to you, having good intellectual property and good intellectual property management really does lead to good outputs and good stories to tell. And they will tell the wider value of universities and, quite frankly, illuminate what an ambitious university looks like today. Those kinds of stories really explain how research and researchers are delivering for public and for society. And these are the audiences that matter and matter increasingly. And so interesting when we look at TU Dublin, how you're anchoring yourself in the Sustainable Development Goals. You know, the audiences who are now looking at universities and research are really myriad, and they include the general public, the taxpayer, politicians, and of course, research funders. They're all vital audiences. They all need to be satisfied, and they all need to hear these stories of success in different ways that will resonate for them. And you know what? These kinds of success stories and having intellectual property at the heart of them is really of great value, I think, to inspire future students and early stage career researchers about the art of the possible and where research can take them. Of course, identifying, protecting, managing, commercializing intellectual property, it really is a complex business, or it certainly is if it's done right. And that's really where a good university innovation office comes in, helping researchers with advice, developing IP strategy, protecting and managing IP, including making available the associated budgets. And as we've heard from Andrew, striving to make it easier for university inventors to engage with the process. At the other end, good innovation office will be working with industry partners and with investors to get the rights packaged up in the right way and contracted so that they can really help the innovation get out, and importantly, the innovation to flourish and fit with the commercialization strategies that the companies of today and the companies of tomorrow will have. So for me, it's really great where I started from that TU Dublin and Hothouse are holding this event today around World Intellectual Property Day. As you can probably tell, I really am always impressed by the quality of the ideas and the commercialization opportunities that are coming out of our universities. And so impressed by the ability of research and researchers to generate a significant level of impact in this area. It does appear daunting at the outset for some, but it really is amazing what can be achieved, I think, with the right help, the right kind of supports, and the right kind of attitude. And so I think that brings me very nicely, and I'd really like now to hand over to Tara Mcgelligas, who can really tell you about how this works in practice. Tara, over to you.
Thank you very much, Aisling. Much appreciated. And thank you as well for Hothouse for inviting us, or for inviting me to talk on behalf of Micron Agritech today. Without Hothouse, Micron wouldn't be here today, I don't believe. I guess I'll just kind of go into our background. So Micron Agritech started off with 4 of us founders doing a college project as undergraduates in a product design course in TU Dublin. And well, I guess just to start from the very start, one of my colleagues, Jose, he was trying to come up with ideas for this project that we knew we had to do for a business plan competition called the Bolton Trust. It's within the university. And he was speaking to a friend of his and found out that there's a big area, a big gap in the market for portable testing of livestock. So we had this area that we were really interested in as a group, and we came up with an idea rather quickly, a concept about how to use technology to make testing more portable and more streamlined. So with this idea, we felt like we had something. We felt like we had something that was worth something, and we wanted to protect ourselves, and we just wanted to make sure that we took the right steps. So we spoke to a lecturer of ours, Colin O'Kane, who actually then gave us one of the emails for one of the guys in Hothouse, Kieran O'Connell, which was a blessing to us. So we met with Kieran O'Connell in a Starbucks one day. I'd probably on a Tuesday or something. In the morning to discuss our idea. After a bit of hesitation, he overnight got back to us and said actually he believed in us and he believed in our idea, and that Hothouse will file a patent for us. For undergraduates with no experience really with IP at all, this has been a blessing to us. Without this, we wouldn't have believed enough probably in our idea or had the funding to go ahead and get a patent ourselves. So that really was the start of us. So with that, all we've gotten is support since then from Hothouse. So from the very beginning, we obviously had no money. Any money we made was through competitions, which we were very lucky to have won. A good few competitions to sustain us for a year of designing our idea. And Hothouse gave us a lot of support through amenities, such as straight away we got a hot desk in the New Frontiers room in the Greenway Hub, which is having a desk is on its own quite a lot of help for a startup like us. But also having access to a building like this in the Greenway Hub in Grange Gorman. It's a beautiful campus. And when making these early connections, we were able to bring people on into the building, have meetings in a very fancy meeting room and have tea and coffee and things like that. And that gives a really good impression. And it's little things that you don't think of with support of a patent that, as you've mentioned, Aisling, is, it's an asset. It creates more belief for a company. When you have nothing, IP is something. And being able to meet people in a place like this, which is a huge help. As well as this, Hothouse, we'd approached and asked, would they help us register as a company? So even from that aspect, we've gotten help, and it was done for us, which was great. So how's our journey been with IP? So we filed for a patent, I think 2 years ago. We haven't gotten this patent yet. We're still working through the ins and outs of it, but since then we've filed, I think, 2 more at least patents, and we've been working on making our project a reality, bringing our product to market, and with that there's just been a lot of innovation. So we've been quite lucky on that front. And then how have we developed as a company since then? So since then we've been able to approach investors, approach VCs, and we ended up doing an investment round last year, and we raised €500,000, which has been amazing. It allows us to begin rapidly, developing our product much faster. We grew from 4 undergraduates to now being finished with college and having 11 employees altogether in the company, all working towards the same goal. Which has been great. I guess I'm out of time. That's kind of all. So thanks, Emil. And I guess James O'Daly is going to be talking next.
Good morning, all. I'm more or less at the end of my inventions era, because I've been in product development of one sort or another for many years, having started off in the steel industry, from that then to graphite, from that to metal coatings in the aircraft industry, then to medical diagnostics, a complete switch at that stage, and a pharmaceutical manufacturer to a pharmaceutical synthesis, then to eventually owning my own company here in Swords, which was sold in part to a Swiss company back in 2011, which left me then with the facility to establish a small company called ImCell Limited, which focuses very much on what residual patent information was already in the company, and see if you could develop it. With regard to the title, intellectual property, there's not much I can add to what Alison Campbell has said. I am very much on the tail end of this. In the overall scale of things there are 4 types of IP. There's copyrights, patents, trademarks, and trade secrets. And it's in the area of trademarks and trade secrets that I would be inclined to spend most of my time. Trademarks, you will see trademarks for many companies is has been a very profitable line. There's some huge companies, say the likes of Unilever, who have a whole range of products which are all trademarked, and they market these products with that sort of protection around them. And then in the area of patents, certainly within the pharmaceutical industry, we know of the prowess of particularly of TCD and so on in that area. That's tough. You need a lot of money. You need a lot of brain power. You need a lot of financial resources behind you to get involved in that area and stay in it. In the area of trade secrets, that's more interesting. But the question is, how do you protect them? And we're involved in 2 projects at the moment, R&D type projects. One is with Mcgelligas in the food sector. And it was quite a change for me to get involved in the food sector because apart from the only interest I had in food, in fact, was in eating it up to it a few years ago. But it's very, very complex industry, food. And I think it was during one of my tours through the country, I asked this developer, I said, just down in Cork, actually, he said the important thing difference between food and pharma is that food is concerned with safety and it ends up in the kitchen, whereas pharma is also concerned with safety and effectiveness, etc., but ends up in the hospital or pharmacy shop. So when you look at food, you look at major companies in the country like the likes of Kerry, who are now switching away from their dairy originalities and moving into the area of and staying in the area of taste and nutrition. And that is fundamental to it. And lots of companies are doing buyouts and takeovers and so on in that area because the taste of food, you go to a restaurant for a nice meal, but if it's expensive, you'll pay for it. And if it tastes well, that's even great. And, mothers and cooks around the country experiment with foods. So there is nothing there, but there is a lot of what I would call trade secrets there, And most of it is not protected, or a lot of it's not protected, unless you go into a large company like Kerry, where it is heavily protected. But within the kitchen, we all have little recipes and so on, and they're protected within the kitchen, but passed on to others if they're interested. So our particular project with Mcgelligas is something that I was stimulated by the fact that basically a lot of farmers in Ireland still are complaining about carbon tax and the price of meat. It's never high enough, and so on. And on the other hand, you have the push for plant proteins as an alternative to animal proteins. So I got interested in that area, and I found, in fact, that there could be an interest in Ireland and generally about rapeseed protein, which we're growing a lot of in the country. So we have got involved with Mcgelligas, it was 3 years ago now, and on a partnership to develop a process for the extraction of rapeseed protein from rapeseed meal, which seemed not to be difficult, but turned out to be quite difficult. So we're at the point now where we're about to file an IDL, how do you call it, yeah. So, however, that's an area, it may not, what we have done may not be patentable. So we have to come up with a formula to protect that, because there are some very large companies out there, the likes of DPS and Burcon Science and Nestle and so on, heavily involved in that area. But I think what we have to focus now is on quality and deliver. And I think we can do that. The other one is with biofilms, which I was stimulated by the fact of reading just in the paper about the superdrug. And but I found there's nobody doing very much about it. And I wrote to a number of hospitals, to bacteriologists in there, and got a very sort of lukewarm sort of reception. So I went then to TUD, and I met with the researchers there, and they were interested in doing some work on that, but they also wanted me to support a young graduate who wanted to do an MSc PhD. So we got involved in that. So that's where we are. I would just make the point that the whole area of commercialization is the crux for industry. Difficult, communications, resources, and having the expertise and the time to do it. That's what takes up a lot of my time. So I hope I can give you a flavour of what it's like from the industry viewpoint. So I pass you on now to Chris Horn. Okay, Chris?
James, thank you very much indeed, and good afternoon, everybody. Honoured to have a few minutes to say a little bit about my own experiences with IP. I work with Atlantic Bridge, which is an Irish venture capital firm. It's at this point quite large, actually. We have about €1 billion under management. Although we're headquartered in Dublin, we have offices in London, Paris, Munich, Palo Alto in California, Hong Kong, and Beijing. Not sure how many companies we have across all of our funds, but one of our funds in particular is focused on early stage spin-outs and spin-ins from the Irish academic system, and that's called the University Bridge Fund. We have about 25 companies in there. And indeed, one of them was mentioned earlier on is Castus, which in the early days was in the Greenway Hub. I'm on the board of Castus. We've moved out now to Tala, and it's an interesting story in itself. We have about 40 patents now in Castus, and have very much become a global play. My own personal experiences with IP, my background was I was on the faculty of the computer science department in Trinity College Dublin, but a long time ago, way back in the black and white television days, and perhaps probably before a lot of you were even born, but this was back in the 1980s. And in 1991, myself and my two co-founders, Sean Baker and Henri O'Toole. Sean and I were both in the faculty of the computer science department. Henri was a research assistant. We co-founded Iona Technologies. It was a software company. And frankly, a little bit like Tara, we had very little money. We had no investors, and we just scraped by the early days. But one of the first things we did, and it turned out to be so important, was to formally have a formal engagement with the university, with Trinity College Dublin, to be very clear about our intellectual property. And I think for Trinity at the time, we were probably we were setting precedents. We were one of the first startups out of the university. And so for them too, it was a formal process that they had to put into place right up to the board of the university. But we got to the point where we had a formal letter from the university to the company clarifying the intellectual property position and strongly asserting what was the university's rights and what were our rights. And as a startup, of course, the university had a shareholding in a company, relatively modest shareholding. But we got that clarification letter really early on in the process. And I was actually quite interested when I saw Andrew's presentation earlier, how well documented now the process is, and having a formal portal to register IP. There was nothing like that when we started in 1991, and it came down to a series of meetings and formal correspondence, as I said. We tried to raise venture capital. We failed completely because we were three relatively young faculty and graduates from the university. We had no previous commercial experience. This was our first company. And we wrote our business plan, and our business plan said, look, this is very interesting what we're going to do. And we're going to compete head on with Hewlett-Packard Corporation and IBM and Microsoft and Oracle and other companies. And please, Mr. Investor, would you invest in us? And the answer was, of course, no. Nobody wanted to invest in us, and we didn't succeed. But things changed in 1993 when, at the time, there was a top tier 1 computer company called Sun, S-U-N, Sun Microsystems in Silicon Valley. And they decided to invest in us, to take a minority position. This was approved right up to their board of directors by Scott McNeely, who was the CEO at the time. So when Sun invested in us in Christmas 1993, one of the key things, really key things they said is, look, gentlemen, what is your IP position? Who owns your IP? And we were able to respond to them and say, well, it's very interesting. You should say that here is a formal letter from Trinity College Dublin to the company clarifying our IP position. And that correspondence that we had, that formal letter, was absolutely critical. And Sun would not have invested unless we had that clear statement from the university. Indeed, they checked with the university to make sure the letter wasn't a forgery or anything like that. And of course, it wasn't. It was a legitimate letter. And then the second experience we had was we did an IPO on the NASDAQ stock exchange in the United States in February 1997. And Lehman Brothers, a famous bank, were our bankers. Lehman took us public. And during their due diligence on the company as underwriters, once again, the intellectual property situation was absolutely key. We couldn't have done that IPO without a clear IP position. So once again, that clarity from the university on who owned the IP and what were our rights as a company was absolutely critical. And we wouldn't, as I say, we wouldn't have been able to do the IPO without that formal letter. I think I said TCD were a shareholder. So once we went public, TCD held stock in a valuable company. And we went on to have a valuation at one point of over $1 billion. I think at the peak of the .com craze. And I believe it was at that time that TCD liquidated their position in the company and obviously did very nicely. But if I could just say a few words really about my thoughts on IP, and as a startup, and again to echo some of James's comments perhaps, and indeed Tara's, IP, there's really as a startup, as an entrepreneur, there are two barriers that you have to think about, and they're complementary, but to some extent, they compete with each other. The first barrier is the barrier to entry, and that's a defensive barrier. And that is all about protecting your intellectual property, whether that be patents and or know-how and or secret source. And when you're going to raise money, that will be one of the obvious questions that any potential investor is going to ask you. What is the defensibility of what you're doing here? What are your barriers to entry? How come a better funded startup in, say, Silicon Valley isn't just going to eat you for lunch because they can overtake and do exactly what you guys have done and probably do it faster and better because they're better capitalized? What are your barriers to entry? What is the defensibility that you have? What intellectual property do you have? And unless you can articulate that fairly clearly and crisply to potential investors, it's going to be very, very difficult to build that investment proposition. So barriers to entry is really key. And I think for a young company, for a small company, frankly, patents are important. In the software industry, patents are unusual. And in our own case, we had no patents at all, being a software company. So we weren't able to fall back on patents. But what we did have was some kind of what's called secret sauce, you know, something that we knew that was very difficult for others to copy. And I think even if you do have patents, your know-how and your secret sauce are incredibly valuable. And if you can articulate that to say that, gee, even if there was a better funded competitor, they don't actually know what we know, or they're unlikely to know what we know. And that secret ability that you have in your team can be really valuable and reassure investors. So that's one barrier, the barrier to entry. But the other barrier that you need to think about, which is kind of paradoxical in a way, is the barrier to adoption. And what I mean by that is, how are customers or potential customers going to get access to your products? And when you want the barriers to entry to be really as high as possible, you want the barrier to adoption to be, frankly, as low as possible. And you want to make it really easy for potential customers to adopt your product. And so that comes along to sort of not having a completely revolutionary product that's completely different to anything else in the market, that although it may be very good, maybe staff, your customers, are going to need training to use it. Maybe you're going to find difficulty to have staff who are familiar with your product. So you don't want something that's completely revolutionary. You really want something that's evolutionary, that's kind of a natural step for the market to take. And it's fairly natural to adopt it. It's easy to adopt it. People don't need to be extensively retrained. Customers don't need to deploy a lot of capital to adopt your product. You want it as easy as possible. And for me, one of the things is, when you're selling as a company and you're selling worldwide and you're a small company, it's highly unlikely that you are going to be standing shoulder to shoulder with your customer when your customer unwraps your product for the very first time. So imagine that you've got a customer in Hong Kong or Beijing or Australia, Sydney, Tokyo, Rio de Janeiro, and they've got your product and they're unwrapping it for the first time. And that first 5 minutes is critical. You've won or lost your customer in that first 5 minutes. It must be a real, wow, good heavens, good grief, this is really exciting. And a company that perhaps does that reasonably well and very well indeed is, for example, of Apple. If you think about how Apple's products are packaged, and when you get that packet and you begin to unwrap it, you begin to get, wow, the sense of excitement with that first 5 minutes. So thinking through this, how do I get into the market? How do I place my products that is evolutionary, not revolutionary? How do I wow that customer in the first 5 minutes? That's all about getting that barrier to adoption really as low as possible, but at the same time, trying to keep that barrier to entry as high as possible. And trying to keep those two things simultaneously in balance is really, really challenging. And it's perhaps a key thing to any commercial success. One of the other barriers to entry, frankly, is customers and the customer footprint that you have. And when you're starting out, you don't have any customers. There is no footprint. You don't have a defensible customer base. But the barrier to adoption issue is all about trying to get that customer base as wide as possible and trying to build that footprint as large and as quickly as you can. And one of the tactics that we had was, look, we really want to get our customer footprint as really big as we possibly can, as quickly as we can. And frankly, it doesn't matter in the early days of what we're doing on how much they're paying us. The opportunity down the road will be to farm the customer base and upsell the customer base. And once we've got happy customers, we can bring new products to them. So we really wanted to get that early customer base as big and as wide as possible. it was a bit like, in some sense, that we started off with the BMW 1 series, and we wanted as many people as we possibly could to use our BMW 1, but we knew at the back of the minds we would have a BMW 3, and we would have a BMW 5, and we would have a BMW 7, and we develop those and sell those and later on. So start everybody up in a BMW 1, perhaps in 5 years' time, they'll upgrade and upsell, we'll get them onto a 5 series, and eventually maybe even a 7 series. But in the early days, it's all about trying to get as many people as we possibly can onto our BMW 1 series. And we tried to do that, but thinking back now, in trying to make that easy to use and easy to adopt, frankly, in the early days, we deliberately kept our prices relatively modest, but also we didn't place barriers in front of them in terms of IP or intellectual property. We had a lot of IP around our 5 series and our 7 series, but for our 1 series, it was all about getting that out there as quickly as we could. And frankly, if a few people were copying our software or duplicating it, or in those days, we were using CDs as our distribution mechanism primarily. So if there were a few rogue copies of our CD floating around the place, that really didn't matter too much because the footprint was going to increase. The opportunity down the road was any serious customer is going to come back to us and they'll want to buy the 3 series, the 5 series, the 7 series. So getting that balance right between trying to get adoption out early and building the defensibility of our product for the important customers was really, really key. So it was a long journey. We started in 91. We went Sun invested in 1993. We went public in 1997. And we sold the company in 2008. And Lehman Brothers were our bankers throughout that whole journey. We had 11 years as a publicly quoted company on NASDAQ. In those times, we didn't live by years, we lived by quarters. So we had 44 quarters as a publicly quoted company, lived through the dot-com crash, lived through SEC changes with the Sarbanes-Oxley Act that really made fundamental changes to public companies' obligations in about 2003. And as I say, worked through with Lehman Brothers that whole ride, that whole journey. One of the interesting things, little known things perhaps, but I'll tell you a story now. When we sold the company in 2008, again, Lehman acted as our bankers. That whole process took quite some time because as a public company, you have to get various authorizations. We were dual listed. We also listed on the Irish Stock Exchange as well as NASDAQ. So we were subject to the Monopolies Commission over here for mergers and acquisitions. And the whole process of getting shareholder approval and so on takes quite some time. It takes a period of months. So we went through that process in the spring and summer of 2008. And in early September 2008, on a Friday, I can remember, I got a phone call from the senior bank on Lehman Brothers to say, Chris, everything's now finished. The transaction is now complete, absolutely complete. All of the monies have been wired from the acquiring company to all of our shareholders. Now everything is done. The whole transaction is finished. And that was on a Friday. 2 days later on Sunday, Lehman Brothers went bankrupt. And I don't think the people we were dealing with in Lehman, the senior people who were dealing with Lehman, had any idea that this was happening. But at the time Lehman went bankrupt in 2008, a lot of money inside Lehman was in transit between various parties and kind of disappeared into a black hole. Fortunately, ours did not, because our transaction had completely finished 2 days earlier. So we missed the Lehman crash by 2 days. But I think we were incredibly lucky. And I think genuinely the people we were dealing with Lehman had no idea whatsoever this was coming. They were as astonished as we were. So those are some of the war stories. I thank you for listening to me. And what I might do now is invite Claire. I think you're going to lead us in the panel discussion. So over to you, Claire.
I will. Thank you very much, Chris, for sharing your story. It's certainly very inspiring for us all. You're all very welcome to the guest speaker panel session. And joining me today for the guest panel are Dr. Alison Campbell from Knowledge Transfer Ireland, Mr. Chris Horn, who we've just heard from Atlantic Bridge, Dr. Paul Maguire from TU Dublin, all of whom we've met earlier. But I'd like to introduce you to Mr. Michael Lucy, who's Director of Purdy Lucy Intellectual Property. And if you at home would like to join the conversation on Twitter, you can do so by using the hashtag TU Dublin Innovation. I'm going to go to Dr. Paul Maguire first. There are many researchers and academics registered for today's event. And from their perspective, can you talk to us a little bit about the importance and benefits of registering intellectual property?
Well, thanks a lot, Claire. Yeah, there's a number of different reasons why they should. First of all, it may actually be a condition of their funding source, so they may have to. There are certain funding sources out there that would require an exploitation plan to be put in place, and sometimes we will need a record of the intellectual property to form part of a deliverable from a project. Another reason why it's important is it is protect your idea. So you have spent a lot of your time developing something out, and wouldn't it be great if you're able to get it out in the market? Wouldn't it be great if it develops some sort of product or a service or a policy perhaps? So it's not just all about economic impact, there is the social impact as well. As was said earlier by some of the other speakers, when you do file a patent, there is this independent validation which goes on. A patent examiner will provide a search report. In it, they will list whether they believe your idea is truly novel and truly inventive from those that are leading the market. So there's a number of different positives of why they should do it. But even from my own personal viewpoint, is to help to get stuff that people are working on the lab out into the real world to solve real world problems.
And at what point of the innovation continuum should academics and researchers open those kind of conversations with their knowledge transfer office?
I would actually say it's never too early, to be honest with you. I think if you have that open dialogue with the people that can actually help you to determine is now the right time to do it. There is one thing to look out for though. If you are filing a patent, for example, they will look at has the invention been disclosed already in the public. Now, from our experience, that can, especially for maybe final year students who are doing these final year project showcases, there can be issues regarding if a video of their invention is actually in the public domain. So this is something that we will talk with the likes of our patent agents, such as Michael, who's joining our panel today, to figure out, has that novelty been destroyed by prior disclosure? But in the past, we've been able to manage that process once we know early enough. I think the quickest we've ever filed a patent is an afternoon. I'd prefer never to do it again. It would put a lot of pressure on everybody to do it, but if the needs be, we can respond extremely quickly.
Thank you, Paul. And while we're speaking about higher education, I'm going to bring in Dr. Alison Campbell. Alison, can you speak to us about the role of higher education in contributing to the national IP agenda?
I certainly can. I think it's really important, and I hope that earlier on I was able to give you some kind of a flavour of just the activity and the vibrancy that's going on in the higher education system. One of the things that I think is really interesting is if we look at new companies that are created, particularly from the research base in higher education, and we look at how they go on to develop the kind of investments that they get, their turnover, the number of people that they employ, they are on a really, really strong, if not a stronger footing, the data would tell us, than those who don't. So what's coming out of higher education, and indeed companies who are working with the higher education sector, we also see that they have similar advantages from engaging in research and collaborating with HE. So there's a real role to play. It's not a complete one. It's really about having a basket of very different solutions that are out there. Not every company will be the right company to work with the university. Not everybody in a university will be the right person to go and work with the company or to form a company. But I think what we can say is it really is very vibrant and it really is very important. We're going well. That's no need to be complacent. And we actually need to see more and we need to see more of higher quality. But I think initiatives such as really stimulating the pipeline of new ideas, really being able to manage them through innovation offices, and having entities such as the University Bridge Fund that Chris was talking about earlier, that are investment vehicles that understand what it looks like when research is coming out and companies are coming out from higher education and can understand the differences there. Really, really important.
Thank you, Alison. And we're here because it is World Intellectual Property Day. How can we use IP rights to build a stronger, more competitive and resilient businesses in Ireland?
Yeah, what can we do with IP and building that kind of resilience in companies? I think, as we've been hearing, and I hope that we'll continue to hear in the panel discussion, having some IP is really, really helpful, because it does really allow a company to have an asset that's tradable, and to have something that gives other people confidence that they know really simply, they know what they're doing. They've actually thought through an R&D strategy. They've thought through a go-to-market strategy, and they've also thought what their unique position is. They know that they want to protect it. I think that makes companies, number one, look really smart. I think it does give some encouragement towards being investable. And I think really importantly, it also does create that bit of a sort of protective barrier. The funny thing about IP is that it's what you call a negative right, which basically means it gives you the right to fend off other people who are trying to walk into your space. But actually having IP does just that. It puts that flag up and it says, this is mine, this territory is mine, and this is how we want to develop in there. And it's really just part of all of the assets that a company might have when it's looking at what do we have in the war chest, what could look attractive, what could look defensible. It's incredibly valuable.
And finally, Alison, Ireland has this well-established knowledge transfer ecosystem. We have our technology gateways, our centres, our national institutes, our SFI research centres, our universities, and this breadth of offerings for companies from startups through to multinationals. For companies listening today who have yet to engage with the services available and are perhaps overwhelmed by the scale of information that there is, what would you suggest as a good first stage approach towards engagement?
Oh, Claire, you're so right. It can be bamboozling because it's so good. It's very complicated. And I would say very first step, if anybody takes anything away from this and you're unsure where to go, visit the Knowledge Transfer Ireland website, because what you'll find there is in one place a really easy way to access where all of the colleges sit, where all of the gateways, where all of the centres sit. You can find advice on what's IP and confidentiality. You can find example template agreements that you might want to use in any kind of situation. Knowledge Transfer Ireland was set up by the government. We're a national initiative, and our job is to make it easier for companies and for entrepreneurs to navigate their way around the higher education system so they can innovate easily and find the right people to talk to. And they're people just like the staff who sit in Hothouse.
Thank you very much, Alison. And while we're talking about companies, I'd like to bring in Michael Lucy, Director of Purdy Lucy Intellectual Property. I'd like to open by asking you about the corporate advantages of registering intellectual property.
Thank you, Claire. So there's many advantages being from a corporate point of view. I think it was touched on a few of the earlier speakers that your IP is an asset. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's a registered IP, right? Every company has some form of intellectual property in the way they do things, in the way their know-how, confidential information. And then if the needs are there for that company, look at registered rights around patents, trademarks and designs. So there's a whole suite of IP and I suppose the whole purpose of World IP Day today. It's not just about patents and they're very difficult to get. I think the concept or idea that the listeners are in this morning, that there's other forms of IP. There is IP in your company. It's how you document that. And from a corporate point of view, we encourage every company that comes into us that we talk to if they don't file patents, that at a minimum they should have an IP policy corporate document documenting or have some way safeguards in place to safeguard their IP and what IP assets they have. So when the likes of Chris or investors are looking into new companies, they can see, yeah, they have an IP policy, and this is their barrier. These are the assets that they have on their balance sheet.
Thank you very much, Michael. And in terms of talking about startups, what are the major IP challenges that startups face in Ireland?
Yeah, we work very closely with all the universities, and we work with a lot of the spin-outs. So the common thread we encounter with people is that it's a time resource issue. So, you know, you're an academic or a young person setting up a company for the first time. There's lots of issues. You're trying to get the product, you're trying to deal with investors, you're trying to set up an office, you're trying to employ people. So IP and looking down into patents and trademarks, it's kind of kept on the long finger, because if you start developing a patent portfolio, it is a time-consuming process, and that's in addition to it can be inexpensive as well to develop a patent portfolio. But really, it's a time resource issue, and I would encourage anyone listening this morning to talk to the likes of the Technology Transfer Office in TUD or KTI, and they're there to help. They have wonderful people in there, huge resources behind them, a very sophisticated body of information that can help a startup to safeguard their main assets, their IP in their startup company.
Thank you very much, Michael. And while we're talking about startups, I'd like to bring Mr. Chris Horn in from Atlantic Bridge to talk a little bit about IP as value creation in startups and spin-outs, and kind of get the VC perspective on that. Can you talk to us a little bit about IP and how it can enhance the market value of businesses?
I think for startups, particularly here in Ireland, IP is critical. And it's pretty much as Michael said, it's not necessarily patents, or it's not necessarily just patents. There's other aspects to IP as we've discussed. But if there are basically two approaches, perhaps, with a startup. You've either got some defensible knowledge, some defensible IP, or you don't. And if you don't, then it becomes a land grab. The only thing you can do is grab as many customers as you possibly can, as quickly as you can, build a beachhead in the industry. So those are basically the two approaches. Either you've got something defensible or you don't, in which case all you can do is accumulate customers as quickly as you can. And that second approach works for well-funded startups, and it's absolutely what some Silicon Valley startups do. They get a lot of money in venture capital, and they go out and they try and dominate the market just as rapidly as they possibly can. But for startups in Ireland, and even maybe for startups in Europe, that's not really feasible, because you don't get that level of funding to be able to do that and have a very strong marketing team, spend a lot of money on customer acquisition. So your only approach, frankly, really is IP on intellectual property. And so I think in the Irish context, every VC is going to be asking you about your IP and how is it protected, what you know, how is it defensible against the opposition. And if you start talking about, well, actually, that's not our strategy, instead we're going to go out there and just flood the market as quickly as we can, you'll quickly see, I think in the Irish context, eyes glaze over and people say, frankly, we're happy to invest 1 billion in you, but we can't afford to invest 100 million into you. We just don't have that capital to put to work. So in the Irish context, IP for startups is absolutely critical, and you've got to have that thought through.
You spoke to us a little bit earlier about the University Bridge Fund, which I'm sure will be of great interest to a number of the researchers who are listening today. Can you talk to us a little bit about intellectual property strategy for startups, perhaps in some of the companies you've come across in your own portfolio?
Well, I can talk briefly about Castus as one example, obviously close to the hearts of many in TU Dublin. Castus already had some, working with the university, already had some patents in progress before Atlantic Bridge came along. And we invested in them. I'm trying to remember, I think it was about 2017 or thereabouts. And so as part of our due diligence, we're able to protect the IP position, confirm that with the TTO office and the university. So that was a company in some sense that had already developed at least some IP in conjunction with the university before we invested in them. And since then, they developed the IP further. But then if I think of some other companies, I'm on the board of both Volograms and Data Chemist, which are two spin-outs from Trinity College Dublin, computer science, a surprise, surprise. And in both of those cases, the day the company was formed, day one, is the day that we invested. On the very first day of the company, I was on the board of directors. So we actually worked with the founding team before they had formed a company. We worked with them while they were still researchers, and they wanted to form a company. We coached them and guided them through, well, what are the steps and what do you need to think about? How do you become an investable proposition? So that on the day they formed the company, we wrote them a check. Obviously, we've been through a process there. But so in some cases, we work with researchers before they even formed the company and work through a strategy with them. In other cases, we're working with companies which are already formed. So I think generally our message from Atlantic Bridge is it's never too early to talk to us. Even if you haven't formed a company yet, that's absolutely fine. Come and talk to us. We're not suggesting you form the company this afternoon, but let's talk through what are the steps, what are the phases you need to go through if you're going to become an investable opportunity for us. What things do you need to get done and how can we help? And it's very much, frankly, it's almost a courtship between us and them, between the founding team and us. Can we work together? Can we get to know together? And, it's quite a long process then. Once we invest, it can be several years before necessarily there's an exit. So we're going to be working together potentially for a period of years. So we've got to feel comfortable about working with each other. And that takes time to build that relationship.
Thank you very much, Chris. And for anyone who wants any further information, you can find that on www.universitybridgefund.com. My final question is going to be for all of the panelists to date, so please feel free to jump in. And it's our future scoping question. So we're looking at the future for IP protection. What do you see as the developments or the challenges or the emerging trends?
Well, maybe Claire, I'll just jump in there. First of all, from a university viewpoint, you've seen there how Andrew has talked about the launch of our new sort of online system to make it easier. Like all we're trying to do for the staff and students at TU Dublin is to make it as easy as possible to start the engagement process. And sometimes filling out forms can be quite difficult. So that's one thing we're always look at is sort of raise the awareness, but also make it easier for people to engage with our services.
Well, look, I'd love to continue the conversation, but unfortunately, we've come to the end of our time. I'd like to extend our thanks to Alison, Chris, Paul, and Michael for taking part in today's panel. And I'll now hand over to my colleague, Jack Macdonald from TU Dublin.
Thank you, Claire, and good afternoon, everyone. As Claire mentioned, my name is Jack Macdonald, and I am Industry Liaison Manager with TU Dublin. I'm just going to take a few brief moments, if I may, to bring proceedings to a close here today. And we do hope that you have enjoyed today's session. I certainly found it very stimulating, very, very informative. What I wanted to do, if I can, is leave you with two simple messages. And the first message, if you like, is targeted at our external guests. You may be working in industry, in the enterprise or commercial sector today, in a small company, in a large company, perhaps running your own business. And my message to you is, having listened to today's conversation, is please start the conversation. Get in touch with ourselves in TU Dublin, or indeed with a university or institute around the country. What we can do is we can help to connect you with the right expertise and the technology within our system. So don't hesitate to start the conversation. You will, I believe, be very pleasantly surprised at what can be accomplished. And the other thing we can help you with, and we're quite adept at this, is help you to tap into some of the state aid and funding that is available in terms of research, grants, and so on, to help you drive your innovation agenda in your company, to help you develop out your product portfolio, and to help you engage, for example, in research that, to be honest, can be risky, can be expensive, etc. So do get in touch, help us to help you tap into, research funding, etc. And we are here to assist. My second message today is really targeted at our internal audience. You may be an academic supervisor, a researcher, you may be a research student, with TU Dublin, or indeed with any university or institute around the country. And what I would say to people internally is, take the opportunity to make yourself familiar with your IP policy. In our case, with our TU Dublin IP policy. As you're working on your research journey, do keep in mind and stay alert to the possibility that there may be commercial potential in the research that you're working on. You've heard examples here today from companies such as Micron Agritech, a recent spin-out from TU Dublin, that did exactly that. And that's, started with a simple conversation, led to a patent filing, led to the company successfully raising some substantial venture capital money and helping to develop out what still is today a very early stage, but high, a company with very good prospects going forward. Take note in particular, Andrew Marsh, my colleague in the Knowledge Transfer Office, talked about our new online invention disclosure form. This is designed to make it easier than ever for you to catalogue the outputs of your research, to bring them to the attention of our Knowledge Transfer Office, and again, to start that internal conversation. We in the Knowledge Transfer Offices, and we have colleagues on the city campus in Blanchardstown and in Tallaght. We can, give you advice. We can help you successfully navigate, the journey towards commercializing the outputs from your research, and we can help you hopefully avoid some of the pitfalls along the way. So you've met a number of us here today. You've met Claire, Paul, Andrew, my colleague Kieran O'Connell, myself. We're all here to assist. So please knock on our doors, come and find us, and we will help you navigate that journey. With that, I've really come to the end of what I wanted to say, other than to thank my colleagues, in particular to Claire and Paul, and also to Danielle Whelan, who's not on the call today, but who put in huge effort and led a huge team effort, in fact, to put together today's event for everyone. And if I could thank in particular our external speakers, and I still see most of you online. I see Dr. Alison Campbell from Knowledge Transfer Ireland, James O'Daly from IMCEL, Chris Horn from Atlantic Bridge, Tara Mcgelligas from Micron Agritech, and then last but not least, Michael Lucy. Thank you for joining us today from Purdy Lucy. That's it from me, folks. If I could thank everyone who attended today's event, we certainly hope you enjoyed it and took something from it. And we look forward, I hope, to seeing all of you again soon. So please do stay in touch. Thank you very much.